there's a increasing trend of youth population in the city of Makassar, but at the same time declining number of youth in the surrounding districts. But then on the other hand, we also see a number of youth unemployment rate in Makassar city higher than in the district. So there must be something that is not right in there.
Interesting. When we talk about youth, I guess it's important to remember that we're talking about people aged 16 to 30. We have heard that South Sulawesi has a population of almost 9 million people. That's the largest in eastern Indonesia. Young people consist of around 40% of that population, and the biggest age group is 16 to 20-year-olds, so a very young demographic. But Wilma, if I can just pick up on your observations, as you say, there is a trend, but and Wolfram has mentioned this as well. But how pronounced is that trend in South Sulawesi, and what kind of challenges is that throwing up?
Well, the data that we have collected so far suggests that there's, as mentioned by Wolf, there's an agrarian change. There's a land use change in terms of the agriculture land into other land use. So that probably, and that happened in the past 5 years. So there's a trend of the increasing number of population in the city, but then the youth unemployment rate almost 10% in the city. So I think there is something like doesn't match here between what the youth is aspired to do by coming to the city, but then there is no job opportunities in the city. At the same time, declining youth population in the rural areas that might be caused by the change of land use from agriculture to other land use.
Yeah, and you know, as you've mentioned, the research found that many young people are living still in rural areas that are undergoing this agrarian change. Wolfram, if I can just go to you and get your take on what that change is.
Oh, well, it's very multifaceted and complex. So I couldn't give you a very definitive answer in terms of what that change is. In terms of kind of youth and gendered experiences, for example, we can say that we're seeing kind of youth employment trends being highly gendered and differentiated in terms of a lot of kind of rural and peri-urban young women getting through high school and finding employment in kind of the service sector, in education and healthcare, right? So that's the professionalization of kind of the young female workforce, which, you know, if you're optimistic, you could view that as employment that is salaried, less precarious, more consistent, yeah, and less marginalizing, and therefore, you know, more empowering for that particular youth sector. Whereas with rural young men, we find, based on our data and indeed in other parts of Indonesia and Southeast Asia, that many are not getting through high school and are continuing on with rural production and engaging in commodity based livelihoods, right? So many young rural men are staying on the land, and if they are leaving, then rather than getting into service-based educations like working in hospitals or with the government, a lot of them are getting into more heavy labor type of industries, like working in plantations, working in the construction industry, making roads, mixing concrete for railways, and so on and so forth. And then increasingly in the coastal domain, engaging in more specialized forms of marine livelihood activities like seaweed, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Right. So many elements there, which is, you know, the work that you're doing is so interesting because you've got to unpack current trends and there are so many layers to that. And on top of what you've just talked about, the different genders going into different roles and industries, the research is also going to look across 3 geographical situations. There'll be inland, coastal and peri-urban settings. Why are you considering these 3 landscapes as well?
Maybe Wilmar and I can both speak to this. I think first we're looking at kind of the ways in which one form of youth employment in a certain sector connects up with other social and economic opportunities in other sectors, and that in academic jargon is kind of the relational dimensions of youth employment. So we're essentially trying to understand how youth employment in one region connects up with employment opportunities and development changes in another, right?
Yeah, Pat Wilma?
Well, we use the landscape approach because the region is like that. The South Sulawesi has mountainous area, has very vast coastlines, and increasing number of urbanization. So the city of Makassar is more than 1 million population. It's almost 2 million population now. And then the second largest city, Parepare, which will be connected through the railway, is also growing in terms of population. So we trying to portray a better condition of the region that has urban areas, rural areas, as well as the coastlines, which has different characteristics, each of them. So
yeah, and I think, you know, it's really interesting that that landscape approach is being taken, because thinking about where people are coming from and where they're going to is obviously part of the evidence that you need to make some policy recommendations. And Dr. Wilma, you also mentioned that youth unemployment is high. It's at 10%, and to you this is a little bit surprising. Perhaps could you just explain this a bit more, why this rate is so high at the moment? What are your, I guess, hypotheses at the moment, because this is what you're looking at?
Yeah, so the youth unemployment is high, but this is also the trend that is happening nationwide. As Wolf mentioned briefly, in particular, it happened in urban areas, where we assume that because of there's a decrease in the job opportunities in rural areas, or some media reported that there's the trend of decreasing number of farmers in Indonesia nationwide. So probably the young population are not interested in agricultural work in the farming industry, and then they are moving to urban areas, but then there is no fast job opportunities in urban areas. So that's probably what happened here, what we are seeing here in South Sulawesi.
And from either of you, and both of you, what do you suspect is the skill level of the young people who are moving into these urban areas, and how is that affecting their opportunities?
Buck?
Well, it's difficult to answer right now because you know, because of this this pandemic, we are not able to conduct the field work. But so we don't know exactly what is missing in the skill level. But from the data that the statistical data that we are able to collect, suggests that the vocational high school graduates has a higher number of unemployment. So there is a mismatch between what our youth or the South Sulawesi youth attain from the school and the job availability. So this is a very rough idea about what is happening right now.
I would also add that the attainment of skills is also highly geographically specific. So, you know, in rural hinterland areas, in kind of agricultural spaces, rural young men and women often don't move through secondary school. And so their skills are often deemed kind of quote unquote informal technical specializations in farming and so on and so forth, and are often not given sufficient attention to by policymakers, or they're tried to be skilled up and kind of modernized and so on and so forth. Whereas in more peri-urban areas around the city, you see young women and men moving through kind of secondary school education, getting into vocational training, and increasingly getting through college, university, and then finding those service sector jobs. So there's a bit of a kind of rural peri-urban divide in terms of kind of youth employability and the gender dimensions to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. How will the trend of young people leaving the farming areas affect the peri-urban areas? Or, I mean, we've seen a rise in unemployment. Do you think there will be other impacts of that? Or what would you hope to be studying?
Yeah, Pak Wilmer, do you want to have a go at that, and then I can supplement what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a number of job opportunities will likely be able to be available in either in the city of Makassar or in the outskirts of city of Makassar, and as Wolf mentioned, there's there's increasing trend of occupation available in construction industry, because this is what is happening right now in terms of the land use change. A lot of paddy field, the rice field, or the dry field turn into housing. So in the past 5 years, so a lot of construction jobs available. That's why I guess the people from rural areas with low education level, especially men, they turn to these job opportunities. While for the young women, they attain higher educational level and then try to look for a job in service industries. So I think in the long run, it will create also the change in the structure of the employment in Makassar metropolitan areas.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that the extent to which rural kind of male youth are absorbed in peri-urban construction and infrastructure really depends on the pace and the intensity of rural outmigration. So in many instances, you will have more young men from rural areas moving out quickly for a particular reason. This might be because of a hazard event, drought, not making farming available, and then moving to peri-urban spaces, but not finding any jobs, or there being kind of low job availability, which renders them kind of a surplus in a critical sense, whereby they don't have employment opportunities, and they have to make use of their time in other ways, which can lead to a range of kind of negative social and economic consequences for cities. Yeah.
You've obviously done a lot of observation and recorded as much as you can, given that the constraints on research in that environment. Can you perhaps explain for us, looking ahead, what work you hope to do to identify the skills and education and knowledge of these young people?
Pak, want to have a go?
Okay, yeah. What we're trying to do is, you know, our research team consists of members from Australia, Indonesia, and not based in Makassar. So we are going to work closely with probably University of Hasanuddin researchers and some youth non-government organization to help us understand better what is happening in Makassar area and so South Sulawesi in general, in terms of the youth population and the especially with regard to the skill level that we are still trying to figure out. So the partnership will probably extend to the local researchers and some civil society organization.
So getting that on the ground view really, Yepa, is essential.
Yes, so we still have less than 2 years to complete the research, and we hope that the pandemic will be over, and then we are able to conduct the ground field work that we have planned to do in the past summer.
Because it sounds like you're getting a reasonably good overview of the migration taking place and the demographic that's migrating, and also some of the gender differences that are occurring. But to really make an impact in this area, it is around identifying ways to help young people gain the skills that they need or find out what their aspirations are. I imagine they're going to be as varied and complex as the group that you have identified already.
I would say so. The group, our group, with Anna, Retno, Uli, and Rennie, we've all been pushing for kind of a bottom-up participatory approach to research, because we are social scientists and we rely on ethnographic methods to do our work, which requires us to be in the field. In this case, we'll be working via other researchers from local universities to try to organize and mobilize rural and urban youth in different participatory workshops where they can kind of brainstorm and think through some of their own aspirational goals and the skills that they need to attain them. And then that will all be documented and we'll be troubleshooting them, I suppose, discussing, engaging the various aspirations and skills, needs that they identify, and then relaying this, back to civil society organizations, CSO, and of course, various state agencies to come up with reasonably grounded policy solutions. But yeah, definitely we're pushing for a much more participatory and youth-led kind of action research approach. Yeah.
And does the work that you're doing, will that include the impact of initiatives by the government of South Sulawesi, for instance, helping young people in the areas of tourism or providing some English language training? Will you put that into the mix as well in your consideration?
Yes, as we heard from the head of the manpower agency this morning, so he mentioned that the government of South Sulawesi has also offered several training internships in companies. So we will identify also part of our research. We conduct a policy analysis, specifically the government of South Sulawesi. A program or activities that they offered and how that match with the aspiration of the youth. This is something that we're still trying to find out firmly. What do they need? What do they require? And then has the government programs met their aspiration, met their requirements or not? This is something that still puzzled us for now, but we take into that in our consideration.
And but Wilma, you mentioned earlier about the perception of farming that is seeping into the province as well, and that it's not seen as an ideal career move. And that's one that you're picking up on a national basis. But given the fact that South Sulawesi has a seaweed industry, that it has a strong farming base, that we are seeing more agpreneurs, agtech entrepreneurs, in Indonesia, do you think these are the sorts of trends that might feed into some of those youthful aspirations at some point?
Yes, I would love to see how the image will change with the increasing, the diversity of the agricultural job available in rural areas. if we can change that image or the perception of the youth about the farming work, that is not only like a traditional dealing with soil and buffaloes. So it will probably change the aspiration of the youth in the future in South Sulawesi.
And at this stage, though, it seems more likely it would attract the young men rather than the young women, given that you've already noticed some distinct gender preferences when it comes to roles and aspirations.
That's right. Yes, we are seeing that because young women tend to have a higher educational level. There is a certain educational level that they prefer to work on, not on agriculture sector. But if we are able to identify the change of what agriculture or non-agricultural jobs available related with seaweed industry, as you mentioned, then they will probably fill the job opportunities available from the seaweed industries.
I think one of the biggest kind of gender constraints in agriculture and kind of aquaculture along the coast is that a lot of young women are kind of confined to the margins of the supply chain, production and supply chain of seaweed and agricultural commodity production. So whereas young men and middle-aged men are actually much more integrated and in charge of making decisions and controlling how commodities are produced and flow, right? Therefore, they have more control over the price dimensions, who buys what and who gets the profit, right? So what we're finding both in the rural countryside and along the coast is that many young women are engaged in kind of employment, incremental kind of bitsy employment that is about kind of processing and refining certain aspects of the commodities that are being produced rather than being in charge of key components of the commodity chain.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right?
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily a good thing for trying to involve young women into farming that is sufficiently lucrative to sustain their family, pay taxes, and to survive on the land and not necessarily get up and move to the city, right? So yeah, I think that's very, very important.
Very important, yeah, because you're also working with colleagues who are doing other projects. One is in the area of seaweed and improving productivity and income in that industry, and also supply chains. So I guess you're also looking at, well, if they can achieve that, what are sort of the more perhaps technical jobs or the jobs that require different skills rather than just hard labor that could keep women in a particular community. Is that correct, or am I making a correct assumption there?
Broadly speaking.
Broadly speaking, yeah. Fair enough.
I wouldn't necessarily use the term hard labor, but kind of integration and greater control over the forms of production on the coast and in the countryside, and that has to do with greater kind of access and use over land, decisions about how land is used, decisions about the types of commodities that are produced, how they're processed in particular, who they're sold to, so on and so forth. Because if all of the decision making is in the hands of the male head of household, right, then typically what happens is that much of the income stream follows a particular route and isn't necessarily just redistributed within the family. And with young women, especially when they want to leave the family, they should have certain options for a respectable and lucrative livelihood in their natal village where they grew up, right? They should have that option that exists in other parts of the world. So why shouldn't they have a lucrative livelihood opportunity on the land or on the coast in areas where they were born, rather than having to get up and to leave, right? So the shift from rural production to urban forms of production in cities has many benefits, and it's empowering, but it can also lead to a whole range of constraints and negative social and economic opportunities down the way. One of them being the emptying out of the rural countryside.
Mm. Another area that I wanted to make sure we touched on was the research that you're doing into the impact of remittances and infrastructure on young people's livelihood needs. And it's been mentioned a little bit, but I think we should go into it a bit more. Why is this important to understanding the youth aspirations and development needs?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Anna is around, if maybe she could chime in to this.
Anna is, of course, one of the associate fellows who's involved in the research on that. Perhaps you can.
Anna, are you around? No.
No. Perhaps you can type something in. We'll wait to hear from Anna. We can try and get in touch with her in the background while I put a question to Pat Wilmar, which has come in, which is a bit of a broader look. But based on, you were talking about, and you and Wolfram were both talking about the trends that are happening nationally. So given that, what are the likely impacts of Indonesia's recently passed omnibus bill to youth employment nationally and perhaps South Sulawesi specifically, if you feel you can answer to that?
Well, let's look at the reason why the omnibus law is passed by the government is that to offer job opportunities. We are in recession. We really need investment to come in to the region, not only in Java but all over Indonesia. So that's why the reason why omnibus law was passed in order to cut the red tapes, especially. So we are hopeful that with the omnibus law, then there will be more investment coming in, and people are moving. I mean, the labor will be back to work with the number of layoffs recently. We really need job opportunities, including in South Sulawesi. So let's see how in the next few months is crucial how the government will implement this law into some several implementing regulations.
And I guess, it's those implementing regulations too where we will see the impact of this significant law in Indonesia. I wanted to also make sure that we thought about how are you going to, you're going to gather lots of information about young people, where they're moving from, where they're going to, what kind of jobs they're picking up, what their aspirations are and what skills they need. Have you had any early indications of the kinds of skills and training that they're looking for? And I'm just thinking of the policy panel that we had earlier too, where they were talking about sort of specific government departments. But is it more around sort of basic skills like computer skills, data skills, or something else? Are you getting any early indications?
Yeah, so in terms of the railway development, last year we had a chance to visit the developer, which is the government public owned company Kereta Api. They have thought about giving training for the locals. So there's, I think we heard earlier there's a 2% quota for disabled people to work. In terms of for the local, there's a quota of 20% minimum required to offer to the local labor. And the PT Kereta Api, they understood that there's a gap in the skill required to work in the railway sector. So they are recruiting and they're offering training for the some local people to start to prepare them to work once the railway operate.
Okay, and do you think with the railway was another thing we hadn't mentioned? I'm glad that you did, but do you think then we might all see some gender differences around the railway and potential job opportunities and skills and training?
Yes, I see. As I mentioned earlier, that the young women tend to have a higher educational level, and so they probably will be able to fill in jobs related with the desk job, or even ticketing, part of the railway operation, which probably they will be able to fill compared to the men. They probably have better talent, I may say, compared to men. So I see there's also job opportunities will be brought by this railway development in Makassar Parepare line.
And I'm just, sorry, I took my eye off the chat, so let me just make sure that there are no further questions. No, all good. That's great. Means I can ask more. What are the next steps from now? You've mentioned that you want to be on the ground in the province, talking to young people. You've got a certain amount of information so far. What do you hope to do in the next 6 months to further your ideas about what is happening? And if I could go to perhaps Wolfram first and then Wilma.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different initiatives underway, all of which is contingent upon the COVID context and how that is affecting the health of potential research participants in South Sulawesi. That's first and foremost the priority. So I think we will meet as a team a bit more intensively. We will reach out via PAIR and others to identify kind of local collaborators and to try and find kind of key case areas that are kind of along kind of a landscape gradient from rural, peri-urban and coastal areas. And yeah, then begin to do the quasi field work via kind of on the ground researchers and to begin the data collection. This will be kind of along 2 or 3 different kind of research work packages, and these are kind of carrying on from the pilot project. So basically getting the research architecture structured up and done in a way that is collaborative and inclusive with people.
And Dr. Wilma?
Yeah, so we have identified several districts along the Makassar Parepare railway line, that, and then in that district we try to identify sub-district or village that will meet the profile that we are interested in to look at, and so that they will cover the district of Maros, Baru, and Pangkep, Pangkajen, and Kepulauan. But we have to verify that, and then we are actually working closely with other research group, especially the commodities and the transport and logistics, to identify which village that we can do the fieldwork together, actually. So especially for the seaweed, the communities research group working on seaweed. So we will be working closely on our coastal demography with that research group.
I would also quickly add that it's critical for us as a team to find a way to have or establish a local presence in these 3 regions and certain villages, localities and villages. And that's simply because qualitative research that is about asking questions about livelihood change and family dimensions requires a degree of trust and acceptance. So we can't go in with a really kind of rapid approach, which is about collecting as much information as quickly as possible, and then assume to have the substantive ideas about local livelihood perspectives across different age cohorts. So it's really going to require some careful scoping, consultation at the community level to do this slowly and carefully in order to be able to work collaboratively with local people to get good, solid kind of ethnographic information, right?
That's a good point to end on, and a very important one too. And on that, I'd like to thank both the speakers for their time today and their insights on the work they're doing on interesting but complex issues on the ground in South Sulawesi around young people development and aspirations. I'd like to thank Wolfram Dressler from the University of Melbourne and Wilma Salim from the Institute of Technology, Bandung. Thank you both very much, gentlemen, for your time and observation.